All right, this is part 2 of our section 2.1 for Intro to Proofs. We're going to go through notes, some of my notes to highlight some of the important parts of the reading, and then we'll cover preview activity 2.1. So here, things to note are that the definitions of logical operator and compound statement, those definitions are in bold in your book because you're supposed to have them become part of the words you can use. So if like a day or two from now or next week, I say the word logical operator, you should know what that means. And if a day or two from now or a week from now, I say compound statement, you should know what that means. And if you have trouble remembering what those mean, then making some flashcards would probably help you. Right? Just have the word or phrase on one side and then the definition on the other. You can quiz yourself. That's how you get a word into your repertoire. Table 2.1 on page 31 is a really good resource. It's also something worth making flashcards about because if you are hearing the words conjunction, disjunction, negation, conditional, and you don't know what they mean, then you need to take that table and make flashcards of that. I would say make the common connective and, or, not, if, then on one side, and then have the other three things on the other. Just quiz yourself on what and, or, not, and if, then be really useful. Important, in math, or is inclusive or. In English, it's sometimes ambiguous. When I say or, it's not, you're not sure if I mean or both or not. In math, we always mean or both. There's a whole different word for the either or. Sometimes we say X or if we mean either or. So right now, regular or means or both. Table 2.2 is also a great resource. It is the summary of truth values is really useful to try to think about with those different logical operators. Each one you can kind of summarize because they're either true for most things but false for one thing, or they're false for most things and they're true for one thing. And then the bottom of page 32, the different ways to say P implies Q in English are also important, especially the only if one is one that trips up students, and then the last two are especially important, the necessary and sufficient. Those are usually probably words that you don't use that often, but it's important that you learn to use those words. It's like using those words is like learning to eat at a fancy dinner party and realize you have a salad fork and a regular fork. It's not like that happens all the time, but you need to be prepared for when that happens. So learn to use the words necessary and sufficient. Learn to have that in your vocabulary so that when you see them in later on in the course, not befuddled. Okay, we're gonna do progress check 2.1. And if you haven't tried this yet, you need to stop the video now and try them, at least even if it's just in your mind. It'd be better if you wrote it out, but if you're short on time, just do it and then answer them in your mind and then see if your answers match what I say. If you haven't attempted those and you're still watching this video, it's like you're watching a sports and hoping you'll get a good workout. That's not how it works. You have to actually try it. That's how your brain gets smarter. So we have a statement, a true statement. If a quadrilateral is a square, then it is a rectangle. So we need to rewrite it using the word whenever. And the correct way to say that is whenever a quadrilateral is a square, it is a rectangle. So because squares are rectangles, so whenever a quadrilateral is a square, it's also a rectangle. How about the phrase only if? Like I said, this phrase tends to trip up students sometimes. So it's good to be able to get it into your repertoire. So a quadrilateral is a square only if it is a rectangle. And so you think of it as, it's a square means that you get the rectangle part brought along with. All right, what about the phrase is necessary for? So how do you say it in a more fancy way? So if a quadrilateral is a square, then it's a rectangle. A quadrilateral, I'm just trying to talk too fast. A quadrilateral being a rectangle is necessary for it being a square. And so that's kind of like the only if thing, where the rectangle part gets brought along with it being a square. If it's a square, it's a rectangle. So it's it being a rectangle is necessary for it being a square. How about the phrase is sufficient for? Well, that is a quadrilateral being square is sufficient for it being a rectangle. And so that means that, it's, if I tell you that it is a square, then that is sufficient information for you to know that it's also a rectangle. So that's one way to try to remember it. So try to work with those words, sufficient and necessary. They're fancy words and you need to kind of get them into your repertoire. All right, this is the end of part 2. We'll do progress check 2.2 next.